Friday, we saw a lot of important roster decisions for the Tigers, so we'll go over that. Also, a new addition to the roster. We'll talk plenty about that as well, and just kind of look around the league and look at the newest crop of free agents. All today on Locked On Tigers.
You are Locked On Tigers, your daily Detroit Tigers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Locked On Tigers. I'm, of course, your host, Scott Bentley. Today is Monday, November 25th, 2024. Thank you so much for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season off with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com to get started. Welcome in, everybody. Happy Monday. Hope you all had a fantastic weekend. So today I just got done watching the Lions, by the way. Another great win, 10-1. 10-1. The Detroit Lions, 10-1. Never thought I'd see the day. Unfortunately, the Red Wings had another rough weekend. We talk about that plenty. Brian and I do over at Locked On Red Wings. Here on Locked On Tigers, we are going to discuss the relatively important weekend that was, and that is the non-tender deadline. We talked about that on Friday's episode, obviously. So the decisions were made. We'll go over all the decisions and the intricacies of the decisions that the Tigers made. We'll go over their newest addition. They did claim a reliever off of waivers, and he is now on the 40-man roster. So we'll talk about his profile, what we can expect from him this season. And then at the end of the show, we're going to go over, just kind of look around baseball and talk about some, again, as we talked about on Friday, a whole new wave. I think it's 62 players were non-tendered. There's a whole new wave of free agents that were not in the initial and original free agent pool. So we'll talk plenty about that as well. Let's start with the decisions that the Tigers made, though. First and foremost, and very easy conversation, everyone at the major league level that was arbitration eligible was tendered. Actually, everybody at the major league level, period, was tendered, whether they were pre-arb, in the middle of arb. If you are a Major League Baseball player for the Detroit Tigers, your contract was tendered. Tarek Skubal, Casey Mize, Jake Rogers, Will Vest, Jason Foley, Zach McKinstry, Bo Brisky, Matt Vierling, and Andy Ibanez, the 9 players, I believe that is, that were eligible for arbitration. All of them come back. Now, the little bit of a surprise here is that the 2 players that needed their contracts tendered at the minor league level that were not eligible for arbitration, but had gotten a lot of major league experience in the past and whatnot, were Alex Lang and Akil Baddoo. Alex Lang and Akil Baddoo both had their contracts tendered over the weekend. Neither of these are super shocking. Lang, definitely not surprising. We talked about that a little bit on Friday, how, I guess there was kind of an outside chance just because of the drama that we have seen with him over the last 12 to 18 months, but he was most likely always going to come back. Baddoo is a little bit surprising. And we'll talk about McKinstry and Ibanez and kind of the conversation surrounding them, because they've already signed contracts and nobody else we've talked about so far has. Baddoo getting tendered, his salary projection is, I think it's like 1.65 mil. And so that's decently expensive. And if you are non-tendered, then you're just off the hook, and Akil Baddoo is immediately a free agent, and that's all it is. However, this does not guarantee that he is going to be on the 40-man roster on opening day or make it through spring training or be, certainly not in the majors on opening day. I think that's honestly just pretty far-fetched in general at this point. This doesn't even guarantee that he makes it through the entire winter. And that's something that I want to point out to people, because There was a huge reaction on social media when people found out that Badu's contract was in fact tendered. Like they can still get rid of him. It's just much more expensive now to cut ties with him from now until whenever they decide to do that. It's going to be much more expensive for them. They're going to have to eat some of that money that he is owed, whereas before, again, they were just going to not bring him back on contract. So I still am a little bit surprised because I do think when looking at the 40-man roster right now, he is in the bottom tier of position players that still have a 40-man spot. But it's not like the most shocking thing in the world. Like they might just be sitting there going, look, it's a little bit over 1.5 mil in terms of our budget. That's not really much. And if we get a lot of upgrades to the position player part of the 40-man roster, then we can just let him go later in spring training or what have you. I do understand the hesitation from the fans to be like, okay, does this just mean we're not going to add any position players? Like if Badu is safe, then, you know, we've never known this ownership group to be one to just kind of spill money away. So does this mean that, and I do understand that hesitation and that mindset, but this is really not like the end of the world and not the biggest deal ever. And Badu, I mean, the player himself, like, there is still a lot of tools in that profile, and I'm sure that there is still several people, if not all of the Tigers front office, that in a perfect world would just like Akil Badu to work out. I think it's more so just the three best non-pitchers on the team all play outfield and all are already lefties. So there's not really too much room for him, and obviously he has not hit. His own performance is a big part of that as well. So we'll see what happens with him the rest of the winter. But the notion that this like guarantees that he is going to be here, you know, at this time next year or like in the organization on game 162 next season is not true. Like they still have flexibility and they still can decide to do something with him at a later date. But if they thought that there was a high likelihood that he was going to not make it through the winter, they probably do non-tender him, to play devil's advocate and to be fair. So I think that part is a little bit surprising to me, that he is safe enough to make it through this stage of a, you know, the roster shaving, roster crunch, whatever you want to call it. As far as McKinstry and Ibanez, both of them have already signed contracts for the upcoming season, so they will be back almost assuredly. Zach McKinstry, $1.65 million for 1 year, and Andy Ibanez, $1.4 million for a year. Neither of these too terribly surprising at all. And I'm glad that we got these deals done. So for everybody else, they now have to negotiate with the Tigers, either get a 1 year extension. I mean, I guess they could do a long-term extension, but that's pretty unlikely outside of Tarek Skubal. For everybody else, you're trying to get, as we mentioned on Friday, in between what the player wants and what the front office wants salary-wise. You do a 1 year deal in between those two numbers and avoid going to arbitration. So hopefully they can avoid arbitration with all 9 of these guys. Already 2 of 9 have been avoided. And as far as those numbers go, I'm totally fine with both of these contracts. That's great. No issue at all. It's around 1.5 mil for each of them. That's totally fine. Their roles on the team are reflected in such. Let's talk about the one player that was non-tendered from the Tigers 40-man this weekend, and also talk about the newest addition to the Tigers roster. We will do both of those things right after this. Got to talk to you all about our friends over at Omaha Steaks. Nothing delivers comfort and joy quite like the unrivaled quality and taste of Omaha Steaks. This year, skip the holiday hustle and bustle and save 50% off site-wide during their cyber sale at omahasteaks.com. Plus, get a $30 reward card when you shop early and score an extra $30 off with promo code MLB. With 5 generations of experience, Omaha Steaks consistently delivers the world's best steak experience, and their gifting experts have made it easy to deliver the perfect gift with thoughtfully curated gift packages starting at $89.99. From legendary steaks to mouthwatering desserts and more, save 50% off site-wide during the cyber sale at omahasteaks.com. Plus, our listeners get an extra $30 off with promo code MLB and a $30 reward card when you shop early. That's 50% off at omahasteaks.com and an extra $30 off with promo code MLB. Minimum purchase apply. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Segment 2 of Locked On Tigers. Appreciate y'all for tuning in, as always, making us your first listen every single day. Shout out to every dayers that do tune in every day. We will, of course, be back tomorrow as we continue our off-season discussions. More rumors picking up every day surrounding really every team, but especially your Detroit Tigers. So we'll talk about all of those. Today, though, we are talking about the busy weekend full of roster decisions for your Detroit Tigers. So they non-tendered the 3 players that they DFA'd earlier in the week for the Rule 5 protection deadline. That's very common practice, makes total sense. And with them, so that's Eddys Leonard, Vanasco, and Brendan White. Those 3 guys now become free agents. I think the Tigers will probably try to get all 3 of them back on minor league deals. Certainly Leonard and Brendan White. Vanasco maybe a little bit more of a iffy one, but I think in a perfect world, the Tigers would like to keep all 3 of those players in-house, but just don't have room for them on the 40-man roster at the present moment. So we'll see how that plays out over the next few weeks. The one decision that we did not already know was going to happen, those 3 we very much did, was Wilmer Flores was non-tendered by the Detroit Tigers on Friday. I think, first off, he is another player that I think the Tigers would love to bring back on a minor league deal. But they also, this could be medical, unfortunately. And if they don't bring him back on a minor league deal, I would assume that the organization and the team's doctors have just checked out his shoulder and his throwing arm and just decided that it's going to be a really tough road to get him back to where he was pre-injury. This season was very unfortunate in terms of injuries with Wilmer Flores. Man, a few years ago, he was the talk of the organization. He really was like the biggest pitching name in the org in, 2022. And then in 2023, kind of plateaued a little bit. He wasn't bad, but he didn't take a ton of steps forward either. And then this year, obviously with the injuries and whatnot, just really couldn't get his feet under him. In spring training this year, this guy was pumping 100, and people, myself included, were like, oh, he might be back just as a reliever. And I think that when you talk about this decision, that is probably, if it's not the health, which I'm not a doctor, I don't know what the Tigers' opinion is of his shoulder. But if you take the injury aspect out of it, I think one of the biggest reasons is just the trajectory he's had over the last few years, right? You had, in 2022, people were talking about him being legitimately like a mid-rotation, low-end rotation. I mean, some people, heck, even when he was at his best, like a potential like 2 or 3 in a rotation, starting pitcher, definitely a starter. Then in 2023, it was okay, maybe a back-end starter, maybe a long reliever. And then this past year, it was okay, well, the starting pitching thing kind of flamed out, but he can throw really hard. So let's try to make him a reliever. And then obviously the injury happened. So just a kind of a slow downward trajectory after the big splash onto the scene in the minors a few years ago. If he can still pump gas like he did pre-injury, right? If the velocity isn't a problem, then I have a lot of confidence and faith that the Tigers are going to make him a priority to bring back at the minor league level. But even his command was kind of shaky throughout the last couple of years. Certainly his non-fastball command, really all of his non-fastball pitches, that's been a huge question mark for his even the year that he took the big step forward in Double-A there, high Single-A and Double-A. So we'll see what happens with him. But I don't disagree with the decision. That's honestly somebody and a player that we should have talked about a lot more. That's my fault at the end of the week. This is not the most surprising thing in the world to me. And I think that it, kind of makes sense. And if you don't have room now, does that mean that I would choose DFAing him or non-tendering rather him over like Mason Englert? No, I'm still pretty shocked that Mason Englert has made it this far into the offseason without being removed from the 40-man roster. But that doesn't mean that Wilmer Flores is all, like everything's perfect over there either. And again, it might just be as simple as the injury. So we'll keep an eye on that situation. The Tigers did add someone to the 40-man and from externally, from not the organization, not just via promotion. They had another waiver claim. One of Scott Harris's favorite things to do is claim players on waivers in his tenure as president of baseball ops. Bailey Horn last year had a 6.5 ERA, a 6.5 strikeout per 9, a 5 walk per 9, and a 1.78 whip in about 18 innings for the Boston Red Sox at the major league level. He is a lefty, and he is just 26 years old. As far as the profile, he has a mid-90s fastball, but he mostly throws his sweeper, which for a lefty, that's a decent profile to build off of, right? He's got a couple other pitches that he throws every once in a blue moon, but like a lefty that has a really spinny and sweepy sweeper, if you will, and a mid-90s fastball, that is a profile that in the right hands, someone should be able to do something with, and he should be able to be productive at the major league level. Obviously, the numbers I just read to you are not very great, but in AAA last year for the Red Sox, he had a 2.15 ERA and really, really high strikeout numbers. Like I said, can absolutely spin it and decent velo as well. So I think kind of the mindset here is if you can keep Wilmer Flores with a minor league deal and add a lefty with this profile to your 40-man roster, then that's a win for the organization and the depth within the organization. There's no guarantee of any production here from Bailey Horn, and honestly, he may be off the 40-man roster like before opening day or in a month or in a week. Who knows? He might not make it through spring training. Like, there's no guarantee that this is going to be a big addition, but it's enough of a profile to be intrigued by that for a waiver claim, and the corresponding move has to be you non-tender Wilmer Flores and could still bring him back. I think that's probably worth it for the organization. And especially as we've talked about all year and over the last couple of years, especially with your pitching development team. And not that he'll make the majors necessarily, but we're seeing pitching development take huge strides at all levels for the Tigers organization. So hopefully this really good pitching factory that the Tigers are kind of turning into can help him. You can get some solid production. Even if he's just like a lefty specialist, that's something that can go a long way. And we'll see what happens. It's a depth arm in AAA, and he has to get called up and pitch 20 innings for the Tigers next year. He was a waiver claim. Tyler Holton was a waiver claim and was a lefty with a much different profile, but like without like blow it by you overwhelming stuff. And he turned into Tyler Holton. And I'm not saying that, every lefty you claim off waivers is, but just no matter what happens, unless he has like a 25 ERA and loses the Tigers every single game he pitches in, there's really no downside here, especially at the expense of a player that could still stay within the organization. Even last year, like Hannafy and Gunther, like those caliber of players, they ended up pitching really important innings. They were either non-tendered and brought back on minor league deals or waiver claims, stuff like that. Let's look at the non-tenders from around baseball. Over 60 additions to the free agent pool. We'll talk about some of the players that jump out for the Tigers' sake. We'll do that right after this. Got to talk to you today about our friends over at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place all of your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Third and final segment of Locked On Tigers. Appreciate y'all for tuning in as always. So just want to take a look around the league and highlight some of the players that were non-tendered. We've talked obviously at length about the Tigers' decisions, but every team was faced with similar decisions, and there have been some relatively intriguing names added to the MLB free agency pool. And yeah, I just kind of went through the list of 60 whatever players, and there was probably 10-ish, 10 to 12 that kind of jumped out at me as, okay, there could be a fit here for the Tigers. And that doesn't mean that any of them are must gets. These are all guys that at the end of the day didn't do enough to even stay on a team's 40-man roster at the beginning of the offseason. So like, you're not going to get a perennial all-star here, although there was actually a 2024 all-star that did get non-tendered, oddly enough. We'll talk about him here in a second. But I think when looking at, and I want to make this clear, this is, again, as I say all the time, this is not me saying any of these people should be like the biggest acquisition the Tigers make. I still think they should go out and get a big money, big name player. Okay. You can have conversations about getting cheaper, smaller, marketable players and still want the Tigers to go out and get a big name. I promise that is okay and allowed. And honestly, that's how like teams are built. Okay, I want to preface that so I don't have to read about how we're just talking about like penny pinching and whatnot. This is just the pool that became available on Friday, so it is the talking point. Jacob Webb is a reliever that had a pretty decent year this past year, and I think there was some injury stuff with him, bounced around from teams a little bit as well, but I think that is, if you're looking for a righty reliever, the Tigers did really well with their lefty additions to the bullpen this year, but have some room to improve, I think, really on both sides, but especially on the right-handed side. And Webb has decent strikeout numbers. He's been pretty solid the last couple of years, low 3 ERA, like I said. And I think that could be something that, the Tigers could try to get their hands on and help improve his walk rate. That's really one of the only faults in his game over the last couple of years. And if the Tigers don't think they can do that, then they won't sign him because they're a dominate the strike zone mindset team. Brian De La Cruz is a power hitting corner outfielder that has struggled the last couple of years. His first 2 seasons, people were really excited about him, and he's just kind of slowly declined each year. And like, despite the fact that he still has 20 plus home run power, there just isn't enough in the rest of the profile. He's not very fast. He is a brutal defender, and he does not do really anything else at the plate besides hit 20 something homers. Like, you know how impressive it is in like a negative connotation to have a 20 home run season with a sub 700 OPS. Like, that's tough to do. That is like, you're hitting your 20 homers. That's pretty much it. So I'm not in love with it, but he's one of the bigger names on there. So I figured that's worth bringing up. He's also a righty that has hit lefties pretty well in his career, which is something the Tigers are obviously looking for. Mike Tauchman is interesting. I think if the Tigers didn't have just an absolutely filled outfield full of lefties already, that he would probably be much higher on my potential like list of suitors or possibilities. But I just can't see this happening because they already have so many left-handed hitting outfielders. But that's a guy that draws a lot of walks, does not expand the zone, and that I think this organization would probably enjoy having on the team. But I just can't see it given the current makeup of the roster. Nick Madrigal, I have no interest in. I'll be honest with you. Former top 5 pick, if I'm not mistaken. I have no interest in Nick Madrigal. No power, contact first guy, a little bit of versatility defensively, but man, I really don't have any interest in adding that kind of profile of hitter to this team. We're looking for power and people that can crush lefties. Nick Madrigal may have a decent batting average, and even that's a may, but he has not hit very well and has zero power in his bat. I have very little interest in adding Nick Madrigal. Some pitchers, Patrick Sandoval is kind of an interesting one. Has always had the stuff, just doesn't have any consistency or, well, consistent command. Kind of just sprays the ball all over the place. Watching his starts for the Angels last year was one of the most ridiculous things you'll ever see. Like, it would be the 3rd inning, and he'd have 80 pitches and 20 whiffs. And you'd be like, what is happening? Like genuinely, what is going on? This dude just walks the bases loaded like every inning, but also gets a million strikeouts, right? He'll have 7 strikeouts through 2 2/3 on 70 pitches. And you're like, all right, well, that doesn't really do us too much good, but you do have the potential to get some strikeouts, I guess. The other kicker for Patrick Sandoval is that he is hurt and is likely going to miss most of, if not all of 2025. So if you were to sign him, would have to be probably on a 2-year deal so that he could rehab with you. You can keep a close eye on him during that process, and then he would come back the following season. So that does not do you a lot of good for 2025, which is obviously important to note. Brent Honeywell Jr., former very highly regarded prospect, has dealt with a ton of injuries in his career, unfortunately. But I think that in terms of reclamation projects, his underlying numbers just aren't very good. I don't think he'll be a super high priority, but as like a multi-inning reliever, I think that you could do worse. And I think that if there's anybody that can maximize the value of a player that has had an injury-riddled career like that, it is probably the Tigers coaching pitching staff. Austin Hayes, guy that was an all-star in 2023, hit pretty horribly this past season with the Phillies, gets non-tendered. He crushes lefties. Even this year, with his poor offensive numbers and his poor offensive output, still crushed lefties. OPS over 900 against lefties. So, talking about outfielders that crush lefties, hit righty, that is the profile you're looking at. It would not shock me if he was talked about for joining the Tigers, and they used him in a pretty strict, platoon role with our corner outfielders, with Kerry Carpenter probably specifically. The 2 biggest names, I think, are Kyle Finnegan and Jordan Romano. We'll start with Finnegan. He was the one that was an all-star just this year. Underlying numbers aren't super fancy, aren't super elite, but just a guy that has kept his ERA low and gotten a lot of saves for the Nationals over the last few years. But he's a reliever that, again, doesn't have like elite swing and miss or really high-end strikeout stuff or it's really good peripherals, and was set to make like $9 or $10 million this year in arbitration. And the Nationals said that's way too much for a reliever of his caliber. So somebody that I'm sure will get work, I'm positive will get work somewhere, is a righty, maybe someone the Tigers can target to be, a guy that's used to pitching in high leverage back end stuff, but not sure that necessarily fixes your swing and miss problem that you lack in the bullpen either. So got to keep an eye on. And then Jordan Romano. I think that if there's anyone on this list I would like the Tigers to be tied to, it is probably Romano. The issue is I'm sure 28 other teams in baseball and their fans are probably thinking the same thing. So we'll see what he ends up going for. It also, this is very similar to the Wilmer Flores conversation, has a lot to do with how his arm is. This is a guy that was an all-star in 2022 and 2023. And then this year got hurt, did not pitch very much. And when he did pitch was pretty terrible. So we will see what what doctors say about him, if there's confidence that he can go up. I mean, yeah, this dude, pumped 98 to 100 miles an hour for years and was one of the better relievers in the American League for a couple of years. And now he's getting non-tendered because of the injury and because of the poor season this year. Again, make sure he's healthy. If the doctors come back and say, we don't think he's ever going to be able to throw hard or accurately or have the arm stamina to last ever again, then just don't sign him. You don't have to sign any of these guys. They're non-tenderees at the end of the day. But if you are even remotely confident that there's a chance the velocity could come back, putting him in a situation where he can work with Fetter and Lund, maybe Lund more so than Fetter even, given his injury history, and Nieves, I think that would be a really exciting get. So somebody to keep an eye out for there as well. All right. Thanks for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day. We will, of course, be back tomorrow. Let me know what y'all think about the decisions that were made, about the players that are now available, and yeah, anything else. What you had for breakfast this morning? I don't really care. Just love talking to y'all. Peace and love. Going to therapy's dope. I'll catch y'all tomorrow, baby. Go Tigers.